I kind of wanted to say like why we're recording this and what the goal of recording this episode is, because I feel like that's important. And it's just to share our thoughts about everything happening because the past like few days have been insane and there's just been a lot going around the internet and a lot going on in comments and messages toward us and toward Maya. And so we just kind of wanted to share our thoughts and have like a nuanced conversation about everything. A lot of the discourse online has been very hateful and very negative and very
I mean, at
ruthless.
least like the voices that feel the loudest are really hateful. Because
Yeah.
I was talking about this with someone else, and they were just saying how when someone's supportive, a lot of the time they're just gonna like a message or they're just gonna repost it. So it is interesting. I think just like the reaction to all this is really interesting and important for us to talk about because this is literally what our podcast is about. And if Liam Payne had died, removed from the fact that we interviewed Maya or anything like that, like if that happened and we heard about it, we would be recording about it. I wanted to address like initially up front, like comments telling us that we should delete the video because I just think that is very much not the right move. I do think that if we were to take down that video and erase it, then it would be to erase Maya's story. And everything in that was like respectful. Like she has empathy for him, not like she was going on there to just like bash him.
Yeah, I know that a lot of the comments have been saying stuff that it's just subjecting Maya to more hate. And there's also comments about like letting Liam rest in peace. And obviously, if Maya reached out to us and wanted the video taken down, like that would be a different story. But yeah, like Brittany said, just taking it down right now seems wrong because it is Maya like choosing to express her story on a platform that she felt comfortable with. I think it means a lot to anyone who has been a victim of abuse. And the reason we paused the comments was because a lot of the comments were very ruthless and blaming as if it wasn't doing anything. And that's why we paused the comments. We're not keeping the video up for attention or for like clout or any of that.
And also the video is not monetized. Like
Yeah.
people like
We're
jump
not
to
monetized.
we are not monetized. Like we literally don't have enough subscribers
Yeah.
to have ads on our videos. We haven't known what to do about the fact that so many followers came from this scenario because obviously it's great that people are being exposed to us, but it's a very weird thing to have, any kind of gain for us involved. We're definitely trying to process that and even understand how we feel about it because I think it's still really conflicting. There was also just nothing inherently wrong with that video, and that's what's really sad. I like, at least from my perspective, it's just someone talking about the abuse they experienced. With that being said, I think that as much as Liam's death is extremely devastating, I think that the reaction is also really devastating to see so many people react so negatively, and it's very telling about how the world still feels towards women. Like so many people making comments about comparing Maya to Amber Heard, which is just what are you on? I do want to preface victims of abuse who are watching this. I hope that you know that that is not everyone, that these comments are not everyone, that people are here to hear your stories and value what you have to say. And there are people willing to listen. Like, there's a reason why we recorded that video and why we uploaded it and why it's so important to keep up, I think. We will always be in support of that, and a lot of other people are. I think that the voices who are very hateful somehow come through more, and that's something I've been trying to also just reassure myself for my own sanity within this whole experience, because this is something that neither me or Samira have ever experienced in our lives. And it's also a really interesting thing to experience because we have this podcast about internet culture, and a lot of the conflict that we dissect has to do with events like these, but we're kind of living it firsthand. And I'm sure that we'll have more thoughts about that specifically in the future, but more so this episode is just to address everything that's happened in the past week. Probably really upsetting for other victims of abuse to see the way that people are taking it and reacting to it because it genuinely was just a conversation. It makes sense why there's an insane reaction to it because this like insanely famous person connected to the video just died.
Was like struggling a lot with mental health and stuff. And I think that that's also a big reason why people are commenting on the video and talking about it is because in that video, Maya talks about him struggling. And I know a lot of like parts of the video have just been being clipped. And so people are taking it out of context. But just for the record, we did record the episode on October 10th. and then uploaded it on October 14th. So it all happened before he had died. Some people might think that we like recorded or uploaded it after he had died, which would have been really fucked up. So yeah, I just want to say that. And also,
Yeah.
Maya literally talks about in the episode how she like had tried to get him help multiple times, take him to rehab. Like she had like helped him a lot because she was in a relationship with him and she loved him. And I don't know, the conversation that this is sparking online is really interesting because there's a lot of layers to it. And a lot of the layers to it have, I feel like, are very harmful to victims of abuse because a lot of it is victim blaming. But then I think there's also a really interesting piece of the conversation of, okay, well, what is the internet's role in all of this? And if someone has
Mhm,
been abused, like, what do they do? Especially if it is by someone who's very famous and powerful, because like, a lot of the times the internet is the place that kind of you can go and share that story, and also other people have
mhm,
responded to her and shared their story, so it's kind of a place for community. And the other layer that it's involved is also, I know people are talking about the role of the media and also just, like, pointing blame toward the music industry and how it exploited Liam and the other members of One Direction, which I feel like is also a really big part of it. Like, he had been struggling for a long time. It's just, like, a really difficult thing of someone struggling with addiction, with their mental health, but then also, like, nothing justifies abusing somebody else or harassing someone else.
mhm.
So, it's also just a really difficult line to balance with that.
Just people coming online and not being a space for them to share their stories. There's also the whole aspect of, the justice system a lot of the time not really serving people and not really actually being a system that, like, serves a victim justice. So I think that's a really big part of it and a really big element to people coming online to share their story and why that's such an important thing. I do think it's also a super interesting thing to think about is that the internet itself has become this place for accountability like no other space, like no other system we have, because it's not a system, it's more of a democracy, if that makes sense. And people can be very quick to make bad decisions as a collective, as a general public, because there's not a lot of regulation. But then, in that same way, that lack of regulation creates this space where people can really tell their stories and really be supported by people, even if it's something that wouldn't normally end up getting justice with the law or something like that. Because a lot of the time there, I don't need to like get into it, but like in terms of sexual assault, a lot of people never even get found guilty. So then to take something that's not as clean cut, even though it should be, it's really easy for that to just fail in the system. And I think for a lot of people, that's not new information, but I think that's what a lot of comments were reflecting, trying to deflect the idea that this space is really one of the only options for victims. But also, on the note of abuse victims feeling safe coming out, it wouldn't be fair to preventatively tell victims they can't come out about stories in fear of someone, which again, we don't know what happened, but in fear of someone killing themselves, which is like literally the worst possible thing that could happen. And again, like we don't know what happened with Liam. We don't have the full story, but that would just be like an insane thing and be so harmful because it's not in Maya's hands, it's not in any victim's hands how someone reacts to someone just saying the truth of what happened to them.
She did, like, file a cease and desist and was getting lawyers involved, and there was just, like, also a lot going on behind the scenes, and I think that that's something important to note too. Because I was texting one of my best friends about this, and she was saying this, and I think it was a good reminder, is that none of us know what happened, like, in that hotel room leading up to it, and, like, to speculate about it online, I think is really harmful, and I know people have criticized, like, media and news outlets for doing that, and we don't wanna do that or be part of that conversation about speculating on it. 'Cause, like, at the end of the day, no one really knows what happened, behind closed doors. No one knows what happened between Maya and Liam, what's happening between Liam and his current girlfriend, any of that stuff. We are not involved in this, which is a crazy thing to even say that we are now somehow involved in this, because we literally started this podcast in the beginning of this year just as 2 girls who grew up on Stan Twitter and wanted to start a podcast where we just talk about, like, internet culture and get to interview people that we look up to and admire. And so and then I like, the interview with Maya Henry was literally just me seeing her name trending online and hearing that she had made the TikTok about who had pushed, Liam up against the wall, and her comments were flooded with people being like, "Get her on a podcast to spill the tea, like, get her on Call Her Daddy." And we literally just sent a cold email to her, and that was how we got her on, and we just interviewed her, and she shared her story, and then we uploaded the video, and 2 days later, Liam had passed away, and just the timing of everything was so freaky, and it's spooky to us and freaky to us, and we're, like,
It's, like, literally insane. Experience of us being somehow intertwined in this is a thing that I feel like I don't even know how to process as 2 people who have been trying to build a following, and we've had a small number of people following us. We hit, like, 400 when we posted the Maya interview. It's really weird just knowing that, our interview ended up on all these news sites and being referenced as a thing that has to do with this death, and that's a really weird thing because, obviously, we had no idea that this person was going to pass away, and now that's the thing that is kind of our podcast in a weird way.
I grew up in the One Direction fandom, like, it was the first fandom that I was a part of, and it was what introduced me to stay on Twitter. It was how I made, like, my first real friends was through this band, which is something that's a very shared experience between a lot of people on the internet, and that's what a lot of people have been, like, reconciling about over the past couple of days, and sharing, like, old memories and things that were really big in the fandom back in 2012, 2013, 2014. And so, as someone who just grew up in the fandom and who was a really big One Direction fan, it is, like, so heartbreaking, and I've been dealing with a lot of sadness about it. I saw a tweet where it was like, "My 12-year-old self is grieving, like, the person that he was, while my 25-year-old self is" or also criticizing him for the abuse that he has inflicted. And I think that's a really good way of putting it, that those 2 things can exist at once and that you can have loved this man and, like, loved the impact that he had on your life, but also understand that, like, he did do really horrible things. And with that being said too, like, he is, like, a human being and he was a human being, he, like, was a father and he was a brother and a friend, and like, that just is really heartbreaking on its own, the fact that he has a son, and the fact that he has just, like, a family and friends, and his son's gonna grow up and see everything. That's something that I've been struggling a lot too, and yeah, no one should have to deal with that. The 2 things can exist at once, and I think that's the biggest thing to take away from this, and the biggest point I wanna say is that life isn't black and white, and this situation isn't black and white, and we are really sad about Liam, and we're heartbroken, um, about the situation and for his family and for his friends and for his son, but at the same time, like, we stand with Maya, and we love her, and she should not be blamed in any way for this because none of this is her fault, and it breaks our hearts also that this will have an impact on victims of abuse being afraid to come forward in the future.
And I think a lot of discourse online about his son growing up and seeing negative things about him and things that people have come out about and stuff like that. It's a really weird thing to grapple with that is maybe the reality of it because you can't just tell victims not to come forward. At this point, it's like, yes, like he's gone. There's nothing we can do to change what has happened, what he's done. All we can do is react to it and try to spread more positivity and try to respect him, respect everyone involved. But I also think that there's a lot, all this responsibility being placed on people who are speaking about it. And I don't think that all talking about it is negative. And I think that unfortunately, just like the reality of what he had done equates with people discussing it online and people talking about the truth of some of the things he did. And that doesn't mean that you have to be totally disrespectful to him or at the same time, like Samira said, not be mourning his death. But you can't blame the people who have already spoken about it or who are still just, stating the reality of the situation because that's just not fair. That's just not productive at all. And it is really sad. I like we both have been struggling with it a lot. I feel like for Samira, it feels more real because she like knows of these like the family members kind of like she grew up in this fandom. And for me, I grew up on Twitter. I didn't grow up within the One Direction fandom, but and I also think that that's a really interesting element as well because there's this feeling of disconnection because he's a celebrity for a lot of people. And obviously there's the opposite end of that where there's these stands who feel so extremely strong about this. But I think a lot of the reaction to that we experienced to this, which I think is just an interesting thing to bring up and point out, was like initially when people heard about him dying, they were felt so disconnected from this person and not understanding that this is like a real person with a real life, that they would message us as if it were something funny and be like, "Oh, Liam died. Like your podcast is going to blow up." And it's like, obviously we don't want that. Obviously, we would never want our podcast to blow up for that reason or for that to ever be a positive thing from our perspective because it isn't. But then also, I think an interesting thing is just to point out how disconnected we are from this person despite what we're talking about. I can see that in that reaction. Then also to analyze the tweets and jokes and things that are coming up and people bringing up, like I saw a tweet being like, "Hey, does anyone remember Cut for Zayn?" And I don't think that there's necessarily malice in these things because I think that people just cope in all these different ways. And obviously, we should do our best to be respectful. It's just interesting to explore these reactions and see where they're coming from. And it is interesting because I don't think a lot of this, even people giving us hate, are definitely not connected to the words they're saying or understanding what they're saying. Like, understanding that them telling us to kill ourselves, like, what are you doing this for? You know, like if you think the reason that we should die is because he died, what sense does this make? But I don't know. I think that it is just really hard to connect to empathy when it's someone who you don't know. And I do think there just is room for us to all take a second and take a step back and understand where everything is coming from and where empathy could be strengthened, but also just understand each other and understand these human reactions. Obviously, there was no way we could have known that the worst possible thing was going to happen like right after and then become kind of tied to our video. Despite whether or not that has anything to do with us, it's still really upsetting.
Just like a really hard thing to figure out how to respond to it and how to move forward. And that's like what we're struggling with a lot now. Obviously, gaining followers from this is like a really weird thing. And it's not something that either of us wanted to happen, like for this reason to gain followers.
On the other hand, it's like, oh, well, for talking to a victim of abuse, it's like, well, yes, I want this
Yeah.
message to be put forward. But then it also has just become another thing too.
Yeah, like the thing of people subscribing because like of that connection or like even like hate subscribing. I've been struggling a lot with it when I was like 13, 14. I would have like done anything to see Liam's face and for Liam to see my face and to tell him in person that he had saved my life because One Direction like did save my life as they did for so many people because they were just this band of guys who provided so much community and love, especially if you grew up without a lot of friends or without a lot of love in your life. They provided that. So for now, like for us to be connected to his death in this really weird roundabout way and the fact that he potentially could have seen our faces on our podcast is a really, really weird thing to navigate. And it's something that I've been struggling with a lot. There's a lot of responsibility now that's like coming along with this. And yeah, it's just really, really terrifying because we don't want to ever profit off of it or capitalize on it. That's like not our intention. Like we said before, we literally just started this podcast because we just want to talk about internet culture and the fandoms that we grew up in. The internet is a very hypocritical place also because to be so hateful toward Maya and toward us and toward just so many other people online, like I've been seeing hate
Like
like
telling us to kill ourselves.
yeah, and, like, just, like, hate spouted off in so many different directions. If, like, this is gonna teach anything, like, it should just teach everyone to be kind, especially online, and, like, there's nothing productive about like, sending hate to someone that you don't even know online when it's like you don't know the guilt and the struggles that they're already dealing with. Like Brittany had said, our episode with Maya wasn't intended to, like, bash Liam or, like, hate on him at all. It was literally just like, it was for her to share her story of things that had happened to her. Like, she was literally engaged to this man, like, she lived with him, like, she knew him and she was abused by him, and she also had so much empathy, and she did try to get him help so many times.
We've been like talking a lot about how to move forward also in just like a respectful way. And I think that we're just going to like take a little break from posting because it would be really weird if we just kept posting normal episodes right after like this huge thing happened and it's a death, which is really heavy. So I think we're going to just like stop posting for like 2 weeks and then, come back and continue to try and uplift a lot of creators' voices because I think that it is really important and something we both hold close to our hearts. And it's not something we want to stop doing. I and there's been like so much I think like good that's come out of it. Don't want to make the statement at all that we did
Mhm.
anything negative because literally just having a conversation with a victim of abuse that isn't a negative thing. That's a really positive thing and something that we need to continue doing in our society, or else, like, these conversations are extremely necessary.
There has been, like, other things that the media has been doing that I think have been way more harmful.
The intention that we have is just to elevate people's voices and give them the space to share what they want to share and also just put forth their genuine self. And I think that we've been able to do that in a lot of scenarios. And I am proud of us for being able to do that. And it's something that we want to continue doing. Our thoughts and our prayers go out to Liam's family and anyone who's mourning. And also Maya. We stand with Maya and we support her and don't condone any hate. I don't want to make this like a weird thing, but I do think it would maybe be helpful if people could try to, because I'm scared of like there being a hate train on her again on in like the comments of this video. I think that if you're like someone who supports her, maybe just like be vocal about that because I think it would be really helpful to outweigh all the hatefulness with a lot of support, and it would probably just create a better space because I think the people who are supporting are more just like someone liking it and like moving on. And I think this is an instance where like this person does need our support. So I don't know, in any way that you can find, I think just try to support this woman who is obviously going through a lot.
And you can support her and stand by her while also being sad about Liam's death and while also sending prayers and thoughts to his family and to the people close to him.